Finally, after spending 4 talks of looking at principles behind the evolutionary creation, we're going to try to take a run through the evolutionary creation, but it's going to be very, very sketchy. And it's going to be pretty much abstract. And we're going to call attention to principles, because if we have the principles, we can put them to use in our daily lives. And some of them are really very helpful for everyday living. And we're going to look at this primarily as it relates to human beings. It isn't possible, maybe in 30 or 40 talks, to go through this in a more detailed manner and to appreciate everything along the way, but in one talk we have not much hope of accomplishing much of anything at all. So what we're going to do is going to be superficial. But not so superficial, I hope, that it doesn't stimulate interest. Because in our relation to the greater cosmos is our relation to greater purpose. And so it's important to become interested in this. We're part of the creation. We can't be separated from the creation. So when we're looking at the method of the evolutionary creation, we're looking at something much more important than genealogy. We're part of our genealogy too, but not in the same way that we are of the cosmos. We'll try to begin at what is called the beginning. It would be very helpful if we could begin before the beginning, and we could have an idea of the plan or of the dream in abstract before there was any manifestation of it. However, we don't have the wherewithal to do that, or at least I don't. It's beyond my capacity. It is something that others have spoken of. Madame Blavatsky hints at it in a very poetic way, and Max Heindel gives us some vague hints. But there's nothing there that's sufficient to get a grasp on it or to build from it. Now, the first period of time is called the Saturn period, because that period of time has the character of Saturn. So it behooves us to look a little bit at the character of Saturn, and we're going to be very picky, and what we're going to do is going to be very arbitrary. The planet Saturn is the planet of darkness. Exoterically, it is the planet of cold, and esoterically, it is the planet of heat. In some mythologies, it is indeed the planet of cold, as in Greek mythology. But in Norse mythology, Loki, or Loj, which is Saturn, is the planet of fire and of warmth. It is a planet that represents concentration. So at the very beginning, concentration is what takes place. The very beginning, I have the Saturn period represented here. At the Saturn revolution, I didn't put the names on all the revolutions, but at the Saturn revolution of the Saturn period, it was a beginning of a concentration. That attention is taken from the spirit in a wide sense, and it is concentrated on a certain area. Like for us, that area is very large. It's like the whole solar system, and perhaps even beyond what we consider the solar system now, but it is a concentration. And that produces a contraction. And it's a contraction that the Bible describes it as something formless, but Max Heindel, being an initiate and having seen some of the Saturn period in his first initiation, says that there is a formation that is quite clearly defined. In fact, he even describes it using words something like hard, so that the surface of what is called the Saturn globe was hard enough to produce echoes. Now that's kind of strange, since the surface of the Saturn globe was at its densest, the density of a concrete thought. Now we're talking about things really, really rare. So we have said that there are 7 revolutions through 7 globes in each of the periods. Now we have this diagram that says that in the Saturn period the globes are located in divine spirit, life spirit, abstract thought or human spirit, and concrete thought. Now this is the only way we have of representing it that I know of in 2-dimensional space, but it's terrible. It's not like the way it happened. The way everything in creation, we'll find this at every step of the way, everything in the evolutionary creation proceeds from within outward. So if you think of these globes, and if you think of yourself as the universal spirit, you're drawing on something deep within your own being. It begins with divine spirit, which is the will to be. And the will to be is subtle as that we as human beings are capable of experiencing. Most people think of will as, making fists and gritting your teeth. That's desire. That's not will. Will is so subtle. Will sees things into being, because divine spirit works with life spirit, and the will to be sees things into existence. All right, so we have a little bit of an idea of what's happening. These revolutions are revolutions where we start from deep within ourselves and we bring things to the surface of our consciousness and then go back in. And we do that for 3.5 times. We get further and further outward in our consciousness, further and further materialized, and then we turn back in, and the next 3.5 evolutions are more inward and interning. There are 4 realms in which the globes are located. I'm using the word realm rather than the word world because there are only 3 worlds. There's divine spirit, life spirit, and the world of thought, but it's divided between abstract thought and concrete thought. There are only 2 periods. For those of you who are familiar with this and that are buffs on it, only the Saturn period, the Vulcan period, and the Earth period are periods that use 3 worlds and 4 realms. All right. Most of us don't think all of the time. And for most of us, we're not even aware of the will to live in our own being. We're just not aware of it. We are, in many ways, as much as we think we are awake, we are deeply unconscious. And that will to live, the will to be, is something very, very subtle. Some people know it by its effects. A doctor can tell you that 2 people having an illness, one might look very robust and look like they can come through anything, but they die. There may be another person completely scrawny, like you think they would die at any minute, and they live through something that somebody else couldn't do. And it is because that will to exist, that will to go forward in its own quiet way, is stronger or more manifest in that person, more awakened. Oh boy, it's going to be tough. I have really dense notes here. Now, the cosmos is described as being dark and warm. The darkness and warmth are difficult for me to understand. It presents me with an enigma that maybe some of you have gotten insight into, but I don't. When we think now of these worlds, like especially life spirit, it is a world that we think of dazzling light. So if this period was dark, that's sort of an enigma. What does it mean? I'm not trying to say that I know everything in giving these talks. I'm going to tell you all along the way the things that are problematic to me. Now, I could think of two possible answers, and there may be more, and they both make some sense to me. And the first is that the universal spirit is awakening with the cosmos, and that it sleeps between creative manifestations, and that what is happening is that the universal spirit is itself coming out of a deep sleep. In some ways that makes sense, but in other ways it does not, because there are all these divine beings that are intentionally working on us and other creators right from the beginning. So it doesn't quite make sense. The other answer is that it is dark because to our perception, we were not awake and aware. It tells us very clearly in the cosmoconception that before we entered into the evolutionary creation, we were in a blissful kind of all-consciousness that was not self-conscious, and it was not objectively conscious, and it wasn't even like a waking consciousness, but it was a glorious, blissful kind of consciousness. And then we were immersed into what became the cosmos. And that relative to that, it was dark. And for even at this point, even though we don't have anything like a waking consciousness, there had to be something that what was to become us was aware of the great change, and that if we look from that perspective, even when we look in the memory of nature as we as human beings participated, it looks dark. Now, I don't know if that's the answer. It's a possible answer, just as the first is a possible answer. I don't have any preference. The second seems a little bit more logical to me. I'm willing to believe that there might be something else, some other reason. To begin with, we, or what has become us, when we speak now from our waking self-consciousness, we're speaking from the spirit. And we're speaking through a focus of self, but we are speaking from the spirit. So our experience of being awake now is not the same as being only in a focus. We were foci in cosmic root substance. And cosmic root substance is described exactly as mathematical space is described to mathematicians. It's a space where there's only position. And any locus in that mathematical space has only position. It doesn't have any size. Because if it has any size, then it is defined beyond being a locus. And so all of the potential points or the loci in cosmic root substance are continuous and contiguous. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about some points in cosmic root substance being focused on. This is a very broad speculation, but I think there's an analogy to what's happening in material space right now. In certain places in space, gases condense as particles, and then those particles bring to birth a sun. That may be as it appears in physical spaces. We see it right now. It's an analog to what happened in a deeper spiritual sense in the very beginning of the whole creation. The selection, as we mentioned in an earlier talk, is a reflection of the spirit, the creative spirit itself, knowing itself, and it only picks up as, or enlightens, or chooses, or selects as many loci in cosmic root substance as are reflective of its creative being. Now, our work was the work of taking form, or taking shape, or taking location in being. And that introduces us to a concept that carries throughout the evolutionary creation, and that is the concept of stage. We pass through evolutionary stages, and in each of these stages there is a definite objective. There are things that we are to come to, and this is why the evolutionary scheme really is a plan. It's a creation, but it's a very scientifically planned creation. It's an evolutionary creation, and there is wisdom in it. There's wisdom to know that if this goes through this, goes through this, the ultimate objective can be attained by attaining a series of objectives in between. And the stage that we were passing through in the Saturn period is called the mineral-like stage of existence. And in the mineral-like stage of existence, we take on form and substance and texture and above all, various different shapes. That primary or most primal kind of experience that we can think of is what our work was in the Saturn period. So we began really in a beginner state. We began before kindergarten. Like we're just lumps to begin with. But we have to begin somewhere, and creation is extremely fundamental. It brings things right to the most basic focus possible. What happens is, especially you get in university classes, a lot of instructors or professors try to show you how brilliant they are, and they assume that you know this, and they go through all kinds of things, and they're way ahead of you, and you never get it really sometimes because you don't have the very first fundamentals and a step-by-step way that you come to know things. If we compare the minerals or the mineral-like condition that we were in the Saturn period compared to the minerals that we have right now that comprise this blackboard and other things around us, even the air that we breathe is mineral air. When we compare the two, there's much more sophistication at this point. And that's because there have been several creative periods between them and now, and we build on what we learned from previous periods. So that the universal spirit, by the time it's initiating a new evolutionary wave in the Earth period as a mineral kingdom, it can do so with greater sophistication, and it can bring it through experiences of form and shape and substance and such like that in a much more elaborate way. Everything gets better in evolution. That's one of the definitions of evolution. Everything gets better, everything improves, including the evolutionary process itself. All right. Now, when we were given location, we were given focus. But that focus, it was like the general concentration that produced the globes of the Saturn period was such that it was a concentration that was specific also. So that each one of us was brought to a specific focus. And that specific focus in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception is called a germ. It was a germ, you might say, of formal being. That stays with us. That stays with us through all the different stages of evolution that we pass through, and every time that we have an experience of form, and we go through all kinds of forms and formations, that every time we have an experience of that, that stays with that germ. And that germ is what we now call the seed atom of the physical body. Our physical body is an elaboration of what began as a germ, as a position in space. So we've learned quite a great deal, and we've been taken through all kinds of different conditions, and each of those different conditions makes an improvement on the things that were as simple and rudimentary as possible at the very beginning of it all. So that germ was a germ of thought. In fact, that germ in other dimensions becomes other germs that are, so to speak, surround that central germ, and when things get really delineated as they are in this world, those other seed atoms seem to be located in different spaces, different places in space, in the dense physical body. But in reality, when everything is all lined up and everything comes home, everything is centered. Like in between lives, when everything from all the bodies has been condensed, they all come back to that one central germ. Since there were seven revolutions through all seven globes, you can understand that we picked up quite a bit of sophistication along the way. Now, it's very hard to determine time. How long was this period? We don't have anything to reference it according to. The time, as we know, when we get into deeper inner states, time has a very different meaning than it does here. So it's not possible to guess the duration of the Saturn period, and that may even not even be a valid question to ask. But I think that it was probably pretty long. And I base that completely on analogy. I know that in myself, when I'm learning something new and I want to learn it really well, I'm trying to teach myself Spanish, which is a long, slow, hard project. But when I want to get something, I want to get it very fundamentally first, because I find that if I get it and I get it really well, and I get it repeatedly really well, then the sophistications and the rapidity can come later. And I assume that fundamental existence is like that also. For us to get the experience of form, or for us to get the experience of shape, it probably took a long time. And we probably came at it from many, many different angles. Now, the statement is that we didn't get it easily. It's stated that some of us resisted. Now, how can we resist if we don't even have a self to resist? So there are things that are way beyond our comprehension that we don't know of. I assume it is because some tried to maintain their consciousness in the blissful state of virgin spirit as it was before being thrown into creation. In fact, to some extent, all of us resisted. But the resistance was not necessarily a bad thing, provided it wasn't overdone. That is one of the values of being mineral life? It is resistance. It is the quality of resistance that allows us to maintain or to sustain a shape or a form or any kind of existence. That's a resistance. This is the same thing that happens in the world right now in the Earth period. Our minerals resist being changed. And because of that, we can have solid bodies that don't puddle apart and that we don't have to hold together by will to keep them held together all the time. They keep them, to keep the integrity of the body. So the minerals then, by forming resistance, probably were of assistance to the other evolving creatures that needed a mineral-like state of condition for their experience of form in whatever stage of elaboration it was at. This points to something very, very beautiful. It points to the fact that we weren't dead wood. We were serving right from the very beginning. Even in our resistance, even in our only ability to take and hold shape, we were serving. And that was our service. In human beings, we don't think like thinking in the spirit takes place. Everything is whole in the spirit. There's no waste in God anywhere. If you want to use the word God, there's no waste anywhere. Everything is useful, everything is helpful, and everything participates. Nobody wants to sit there and say, well, maybe in a few years you'll be able to participate and help out. All of us participate and help, and all of us have a function ab initio, right from the beginning. And we carry it all the way through. Forms and individual foci don't develop on their own. They have to be brought into being. And they have to be held into being. And that work is done by other creative beings within the universal spirit. The general tone of concentration of the Saturn period may be provided macrocosmically by the universal spirit, but various spirits on various levels within are the concentrators that bring it down to whatever level of depth in manifestation is necessary. That brings up another thing. We're not alone. The creation is not carried out by and for us alone. We are only a very small part, and we're in the lower part of the creation. Beyond us, there are creative beings that are participating in this work of creation that is beautiful and glorious in such a way that to get even a little glimpse of it, we are awed for the rest of our life. And so, it is a shared activity. Everything in the spirit is shared. Now, this ability to bring us a germ, a focal point, that is our center of formal being for all the rest of the creation, was done by a very high group of beings. They're called Lords of the Flame. Eddie has talked several times about them, and he's done a very excellent job of telling us what they were like and what they did for us. There's one quality about them that is very important to something like this. There are various levels and even various grades of spiritual creative hierarchies. And some of those grades of hierarchies are such that they did not need to participate in the evolutionary creation. This means they participated freely. And this means if you don't have anything at stake, if you're playing poker and you're bread and butter money is on the table, it's very hard to play objectively. But if it's funny money, like Monopoly money or something like that, you can play objectively because you personally don't have anything at stake. And there are some things that you can do when it isn't necessary, when it isn't crucial that you do this and that you need to do this for your own sake. But when you do things from the goodness of your heart, so to speak, and this is on a very grand level, when you do this from the goodness of your heart, you can accomplish and do things that normally cannot be accomplished. And that's why the Lords of Flame did this, why they were capable of this. They had that ability to give us the most fundamental focus of existence, the germ of a separate being, formal being. Later on, when things changed, they returned and they gave us something else. And they gave it from their own being. Both of these things were given from their own being. You know, it's not like something, you give something outside of yourself, you give something to yourself. That means something of yourself is given in the activity. As I understand it, what happened is that what was becoming a personality, in reflection, what was becoming a spirit, through the experience of resistant form that could have duration, that was based on resistance, in unconsciously working and sustaining resistance forms, this awakened the power of will. The power of will is built by countering resistance. And so, in the very last revolution, in the Vulcan revolution of the Saturn period, what happened was that the Lords of Flame returned and they awakened in a dim way the ability, the will to be. So there's two important principles in here. One of them is that in order to awaken a spiritual power, you first must have material experience. And this is really important to us right now, because right now we don't want to endure through various different material conditions. But when we have the experience, it comes clear as a spiritual faculty. It follows from. So that experience precedes spiritual awakening. So all the people who are trying to escape the experience here and suddenly become spiritual are making a grave mistake. They're not using one of the fundamental principles that is within the evolutionary creation. This is a very important thing in the process that is called the spiritualization of matter. The spirit has to give itself to the matter. All right. Another thing that is a principle that we don't have really time to go into is that every material experience is co-reflective of a spiritual experience. Meaning to say an experience of form and substance is reflective as a partner with the will to be. Now this is going to be a little bit longer tonight. We were only 1/4 of the way through the notes and I don't know how to speed it up. I'm sorry that I've tried to make these all be 1 hour long and no more, but tonight will have to be an exception. The Saturn period is followed by what is called a cosmic night. And in the cosmic night, the universal spirit draws its manifest influence. And everything in the cosmos dissolves back into pure, unmanifest universal spirit. no differentiation. But the essence of, it's sort of like, what is the word, when you dip something in it, and it's like something like an infusion, but it's not quite the right word. It'll come to me. So what happens is that all of the experience of all of the beings, high and low, because in the universal spirit, when it's unmanifest, everything is equal. In manifestation, there is a hierarchy, that which is more evolved, and that which has greater creative potency has a hierarchical value. It all has greater responsibility. But when all dissolves and goes back to the spirit, everything percolates and everything gets infused into all beings. So that everyone's experience is not lost to everyone. That in a rest period like this, everything comes back home. Now, when the word rest period is used, it does not necessarily mean that the spirit tires. The spirit does give its all, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it means that it tires, and to think so is a misunderstanding of the consciousness of deeply transcendent spirit. Deeply transcendent spirit is powerful because it is aloof and because it is subtle, and the spirit being itself in itself can precipitate a creation by not being like how you say it, individually or personally involved in it. The spirit does go into it, but it has its value in something else. It's like saying that it focuses in itself, and out of that comes a radiance or an efflux that passes to all beings within it, and it can do the creation that way. I find it extremely valuable to me to understand these kinds of things by studying people who have had these kinds of experiences and who have tried to verbalize them. And the verbalizations of transcendent experiences are very hard to understand. But a lot of the Platonists and the Neoplatonists, for example, Plotinus had 3 experiences at least, and some say as many as 5 or 7 waking experiences in life spirit, and he was able to write it down. And it's really quite hair-raising when you read the things that he writes. In an earlier talk, we talked about the spiritualization of matter. That any time that matter is transformed, its essence or some of its essence becomes spirit through a process that is called soul building. And that essence, when it is built back into the spirit, becomes soul power. So that the capacity relative to manifest creation of the universal spirit is enhanced the more that there is the assimilation of soul in the process of soul building. This, at the end of the whole business, everything is spiritual. All matter is being spiritualized, and everything goes very, very rapidly. And there's a great grand dissolution into spirit toward the very end. Now we have to remember that there are a lot of different spiritual hierarchies or kingdoms that are participating. And so there's a lot of information that has to be processed. We have to mull over things. We have to process things. I used to have a girlfriend that I loved very, very dearly, but to be with her, you could only do 1 or 2 things for an hour or so, and then she would have to go home and process all of the experience. She became a very deeply spiritual woman because none of her experience was lost to her. She processed all of it. So, this is what is done in the cosmic nights. No one knows, since there's nothing objectified, to know how long it lasts. But I have a hunch, and it's only a hunch, that it's something like when you lay in bed. You lay in bed and you sleep and you dream and you think over the day, and after a while, you can't lay there anymore. You can't lie there anymore. You get the urge that you have to get out, you have to do something, you start to stir. And I tend to think that that is what it is like with the universal spirit. Obviously, there is no cosmic alarm clock to wake you up and bring you out. No doubt, there is a lot of planning or replanning that takes place in a cosmic night. Because it is a creation, and in a creation you're doing something new. And you have an idea of what you want to accomplish, and that idea may be very objective, but because it's new, and because it's something that hasn't ever been before, things aren't exactly the way you expect them to be. And I believe that is true on every level of existence. So, if there are people who resisted so much that they straggled in the Saturn period, there had to be something among the creative hierarchies that they had to replan things in order to accommodate to this. Now, I'm not fond of sports analogies, but in this case there is a sports analogy that is perfectly apt. It is what is called the game plan. In a sporting contest, you know who your opponent is. And in professional sports, they have photographic or films of everything that the opponent has done. And they know which, in this kind of circumstance, which kind of move this person is going to make and such like that. And they understand the strengths and weaknesses of the opponents, and you understand the strength and the weaknesses of your team. And you match a plan so that you can use your people to be able to match up to their people so that you can be victorious in the contest. That's called a game plan. And, people set out to accomplish their game plan, but sometimes it doesn't work. Other people adapt, and there are conditions that you couldn't see. And so when there's a rest period, like a quarter or a half time, you tweak the game plan, and you change it accordingly. And something like that is what takes place in the cosmic night, at least as I understand it. It is, we're prepared to do new things. Now, at any rate, after the rest comes the sun period. And the structure of proceeding without and back within is the same. But the whole of the creative structure itself is now one realm deeper into matter. So that the highest level in the sun period is life spirit. And the lowest level in the sun period is in the desire world. And so there is analogy, but in the analogy, everything has changed. This is a pretty radical change. From a thought to a desire is quite a radical change. And so everything is different. And that is part of the objective. The objective is to bring out as many sides of the spirit as is possible. And the character of spirit, that is the facet of spirit is character, and that is brought out by bringing the spirit through different kinds of conditions. And each of those different conditions, those experiences, when they're digested, become a different flavor of character within the becoming being. The earth globe, which is the deepest and most manifest globe, is in the desire world. So things are different. Now, this means that our new bodies, new physical bodies that were begun in the Saturn period, now have a different texture to them. They have a different quality. they have a different substance to them. And it's desire substance. So like what we now have as a living form began as a thought, and that thought metamorphized into or morphed into a desire. Eventually this becomes condensed all the way down to being something physical. So in the Saturn period, we took on the basic principles of stuff and such. And to do that, in the 7 revolutions of the Saturn period, we went through many different kinds of forms. Just like we can take the minerals around us and we can give them all different kinds of forms. And each of those different kinds of forms or shapes brings the experience of form per se, enlarges that for the spirit, so that form in general is understood through many forms. Now, obviously, it must have dawned on us who are now becoming divine spirits, who have reason and we can understand purpose. It must have dawned on us in that cosmic night that as we remembered different forms, or they were remembered to us, that wouldn't it be nice if we could have one form that would change shape, or that could repair itself, or that could grow. And so what began as a very simple experience of simple form in this second stage becomes a plant-like stage or a vegetable stage, in that the form is capable of living and is capable of growing and changing shape, and itself have a little evolution that runs through its changing shape. So in order to do this, there had to be an agency that made for the change of shape. And that the change of shape had to be sustained. It had to be taken care of so it didn't always fall back out again into being just another mineral shape. And these are all things that are done by the formative principle. And the formative principle now is the etheric vital body. It is what gives us vital life. So in order for us to pass from the mineral-like stage to the plant-like stage, we had to incorporate into the body or another vehicle that could do all of these things while the first body was maintaining form. We call that the vital body in the Rosicrucian philosophy. But since everything works from within out, you just don't slap a vital body on top of the physical body. Everything has to come from within. So it's like in music, you go back to the top. You start all over again. So in the Saturn revolution of the Sun period, the physical body was rebuilt. But it was rebuilt with the capacity of being, as Rod would say, of being permeable to vitality. So there's a difference between a little tiny stone, and there's a difference between that and an alga. An alga can live and grow and change its shape and go through that cycle. And that difference is what was accomplished in the Saturn revolution of the Sun period. In the Sun revolution of the Sun period is when that bright, vital capacity was brought to the now dual organism. So we can see this is how stages are accomplished. I'm way away from my notes here, and I don't know what I'm going to. I don't know how I'm going to ever get back to them again. So everything is rebuilt with the idea to have something new within it. Now, this new vital body was not as deeply immersed into matter as the physical body was, because it didn't have that experience. And the new vital body was now in the world of thought. And this is the way it is with everything. We've said that earlier this week we said that one of the overall objectives of the evolutionary creation was to produce a creative mind. And it is the creative mind that produces each of the new features or each of the new adaptations that have to be in order for the evolutionary creation to progress. So our etheric body, our vital nature, begins as a thought, and it is within the dense physical body. Now, this happens during the sun revolution of the sun period. And so for all of the rest of the revolutions, this new physical and vital body are going through evolutionary experiences. And they're being modified, they're learning lessons, and they're sustaining their state of being. If you stay with something long enough, almost anything, if you stay with it long enough, you'll gain an ability or a power at it, and it's the same way in the evolutionary creation. However, in the sixth revolution, that is the Venus revolution of the sun period, it begins to dawn on the spirit. It dawns at an earlier time because now the becoming spirit is more adept at creation. Everything gets better all the way through, so things can happen at an earlier state. And so in the Venus revolution, the second last revolution, what happens is the life spirit is born. And the life spirit is the source of spiritual light. When you have an idea or a creation, the lights go on. The idea is not the light, it's the life spirit, the truth that is within that idea, that is the light. And the light spirit is analogous to, in physical light, you might say all of the plants that are growing around us congeal or are formed out of the light, out of sunlight. Either fresh sunlight or sunlight that was condensed as minerals millions of years ago. Similarly, when we have experienced all these different plant-like forms during the first 5 or 6 revolutions of the sun period, that dawns on the spirit the power of being able to imagine a form. Any form, but especially a form that is capable of changing shape and of being vital. The pure imagination is one of the functions of the life spirit. And in the Vulcan revolution of the sun period, this capacity to will, is united with the capacity to imagine. This is quite an advance. It takes a long time. It's a slow process, but this is quite an advance. We have taken something basically from a state of almost nothingness so that in form it can take form and it can live and it can be vital. And at the other end of its being, which is reaching down toward the forms that are unconsciously created for it or through it or by it or something like that, it's reaching down, and it now has the capacity for the will to be and the ability to imagine the form through which it's going to express itself. So, at the end of the sun period, we had a twofold body, and we had a twofold spirit, and the twofold spirit was linked together, and both of the attributes of that twofold spirit were dimly awakened. This work was again done by the Lords of the Flame. Don't think that they were the only ones, but they were the ones that were capable of doing this deepest of all work on the deepest of the spiritual principles that we have and the most material form. It takes a special kind of depth, and they were capable of doing that. But they weren't alone. There were many other different beings that were participating, creative beings, hierarchies of creative beings. And this brings up something else. We have already talked about stage. Now we have to talk about another principle, and that's the principle of phase. Analogy is maintained all the way through the evolutionary creation. But that analogy is played off against itself, almost like a fugue or a canon or something like that. A theme is played off against a theme, against another theme, and it becomes a gloriously beautiful thing. And stage has to do with the degree of accomplishment of one evolutionary wave relative to another evolutionary wave. For example, we are one phase ahead of the animals. The animals were mineral-like when we were plant-like. So they have evolved to the point where we were in the moon period when we became animal-like. When we were animal-like, they were plant-like. So you can see that there is one stage off, one phase ahead of us. The angels are phased off ahead of us. This makes for interesting things, and it makes for all kinds of variety that brings this evolutionary creation into something that is grand beyond itself. The animals are not going, the beings that are now in the animal kingdom are not going to be able to finish their evolution by the end of this creation. We as humans are what Paul calls a very special people. We're sort of the shuttlecock of this cosmic creation. We represent this creation because we began at the beginning and we reached the middle of our evolution when the evolutionary creation reached the middle, and we will end when it ends. It's not the same for all of the other evolutionary waves. The animals will never finish. They'll have to wait until there is another creative manifestation, which certainly makes for a very different kind of consciousness. Similarly, the angels are phased off ahead of us, so that at the very beginning, when we were beginning in that first stage, the mineral-like stage, they were already plants, because they had started toward the end of a previous creative manifestation. So this produces a continuity. It produces a linkage so that all creations are tied together, and it produces, so that, this is not just a schema that we can put together in our mind, because each creation has a flavor of its own. But when there are representatives from one creative manifestation that come into another, they bring a unifying element. They bring in a difference, but they also bring in a unifying element. So we can see that there is a tremendous amount of variety among all the different hierarchies of beings, creatures and creators, and that they connect and tie us to other creations. We get to especially represent this creation, but that in a way makes us stand out so that we'll have perhaps a difficult time integrating in another creation because we don't have any tie with that from not having had any interactions with being from that other creation. But that's something far too speculative, and I'm way away from the notes now, and I don't know what's going to happen. The third period is called the moon period. As the solar cosmos is right now, the moon is a satellite of the Earth. And in the moon period, within the solar cosmos that was forming, there was a large globe floating around within the solar cosmos. Not a solar system like it is now, but it wasn't a satellite moon that was set out the way it is. If we try to draw images from the way things are now, we're very likely to be misled, and we're likely to produce misunderstanding for ourselves. The general materialization of spirit continues analogously, and it continues analogously so that there are 4 new worlds during the moon period. And the highest of those worlds is the region of abstract thought, and the lowest of them is the etheric subdivision of the physical world. So we have a whole new condition. The revolutions are the same. The Saturn revolution, the Sun revolution, and there are 7 globes, Saturn globe, Sun globe, Moon globe. They carry all the way through, but the analogy is carried deeper now into materialization. This is like saying that if this is a conscious, creative dream, that through which the spirit materializes itself in various grades of matter, and out of that matter brings new spirit, it's saying that this takes place in stages, and that it isn't all done at once. Max Heindel averred that perhaps it was possible that there was not fatigue or anything like that, but a need to step back and think it over. The image that he gives is like if you have an electric drill and you're trying to drill through rock or something like that that's very hard. You go in and then you retract, you let the bit cool off, and let the motor or the engine cool off, and then you go again deeper until finally you get as deep as you need to get, and you make the breakthrough so the inside becomes outside. And it's a very excellent image, provided it isn't taken too literally. Now, the globes and the worlds that they exist in do not exist continuously. That is to say, we are just about to leave the Earth globe and go to the Jupiter globe in the 4th revolution of the Earth period. But that globe is not just now being made. Max Heindel tells us very, very clearly that every time we bring in etheric substance, we're bringing in that new globe, and that we're going into it. So it would be, if there is not a wave of beings that needs a world, it's inefficient to hold that world in existence, because the world is in existence for something to experience through it. And if the grand creative scheme is such that there is nothing that needs to manifest in that way, the world isn't there. This is, what do they call that in the Deming way? That it's on demand, that you bring in the stuff that you need exactly at the time you need it. And that probably, the person, the Deming, the man who produced that system, may have been tapping into the cosmos and say, wait, in the great creation, it doesn't work that way. It comes exactly when you need it and not before. The chemical region of the physical world, that is, this stuff, that's our main field of activity right now for waking conscious evolution. Our whole life cycle is geared toward having waking consciousness here and transforming the mineral kingdom here. That's our work, and that's, but that hasn't always been here. And when it is here, it isn't always here the same way. In the previous revolution, in the 3rd revolution of the Earth period, the cosmal conception seems to indicate that it was no more dense than liquids. So the cosmos was as dense as a liquid. And in the coming revolution, the Jupiter revolution, it will again be as dense as liquid. It's only for a very short time that we are stupid enough that we need to have this kind of hardened objective form. All right. It's obvious that from the light in the sun period, both the life spirit light and the light of the desire world, and the lighting up of the whole cosmos, at least from the human point of view, that vision was the sense that was developed there. The moon rules the desire body, which was built during the moon period, and the center or the heart of the desire world is the region of feeling. Now it's speculative, but it stands to reason then that the sense of feeling was begun in, sensation, touch, was begun in the moon period. The senses of smell and taste probably relate respectively to the etheric realm, the vibrations that Eddie was talking about, or to the chemical realm, because the chemicals actually have to touch the taste buds, so that we develop new senses as things go on. Now, it's interesting in all of this to note that this view of a creation condensing out of a very spiritual state is quite different than what material science teaches us. Material science teaches us that everything is a result of matter coming together. And then there is that thing that is called the Big Bang Theory. I have no idea what the Big Bang Theory means. It doesn't make any sense to me. The only thing that it vaguely makes sense to me as is that it is a recapitulation of the cosmic word at the physical level. But how that, I don't understand that. I can understand what we're talking about here because I can experience it, and I can experience it in my own consciousness. And if one is doing prayer work or if one is doing inner consciousness work, one can do this through experience, watching what you're doing, watching what happens. The description of what a human being is, a form that has life, and that has emotions and motivations, and those emotions live in a world of their own, and that we have thoughts, and that there is a truth knower behind it. That's a much more accurate description of what I experience as a human being than what is given by material science, where it's just a jumble of nerves and things like that. In any case, in the moon period, there were different objectives. There were different things that had to be done. Again, it's really simple. The manifestations of it become very complex, and we learn all kinds of lessons from it. But let's take what probably happened in that cosmic night between the sun period and the moon period. It dawned on us, perhaps with the help of other beings, as we were all at one in the universal spirit, that it's nice to have a body that grows and changes shape and such like that, but does it have to be rooted in one place? Wouldn't it be nice if we could take that form that we know how to build and free it, and in that freedom it could go anywhere? And that's precisely what happened in the moon period. In the moon period, we went through the animal-like stage of existence, which means we reached out for things. We had to reach out for things. An animal, unless it reaches out, it's going to starve. The the plant does some reaching out. It's in the sun, and it takes in the sun, and it's almost like a sense. There's heliotropism. All the plants grow toward the sun, but it just stands there and takes in things from the earth and from the sun. But animals have to reach out, and they have to get things. And in order to do that, you have to move about. So that moving about isn't just a luxury. It becomes a necessity. And to some extent, the Darwinians are very good in showing us that that necessity is important for evolution. And if our continuance depends on the necessity of getting things for ourselves, that is That's what is called for. You see, desire is very objective. You don't sort of desire. You want that thing. I desire that, or I need that, and the relationship between the subject and the object is how the one is motivated. If there's a cat and a mouse, they share a common desire motivation, but in a different way. The cat wants the mouse, and it goes for it. And the mouse doesn't want the cat, and it goes away from it. It's assertion and repulsion is shown through those two beings. So, in the animal kingdom, there is a necessity to have the ability to have the motivation to do something. And the capacity to do that is called, in the Rosicrucian philosophy, the desire body. That is a vehicle of consciousness, that is a vehicle wherein we are conscious of emotions, and especially the emotions that move us to do things. But we have to go all the way back to the beginning again. So, in the Saturn, at this time, the highest world was the world of abstract thought. And the lowest world was the etheric subdivision of the physical world. So in the moon period, we had a physical body that was etheric. That's all the more dense that it was. But when it was built in the Saturn revolution of the moon period, that body had to accommodate both for an etheric body, an etheric body that had more capabilities, that is to have to be able to sustain muscles and all the things that are necessary to move around. Though in the early moon period it wasn't nearly that elaborate. It was much simpler. And it had to be accommodated. It had to accommodate a desire body. It had to build new things. It had to build things like muscles which could respond to motivations to do things. And that was accomplished in recapitulation during the Saturn revolution of the moon period. In the Sun revolution, the vital body had to accommodate itself to the desire body. So you're always building on what you have done before. Obviously, the desire body, through various different experiences that we call species or that we call families or things like that, the different qualities of desire are worked out through different kinds of animals. If one is going through an animal-like existence and needs to learn assertiveness, there's an animal-like state that is perhaps like a ram or Aries or something like that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to hint at that this is pretty elaborate. And to get the whole picture and hold it in consciousness is something that it'll probably take me at least a few lives, no matter how hard I work to hold my consciousness, to hold the picture in consciousness and understand all the things that are going on. It's not simple. But it's something that gives us we know our roots. And we know the intentions when we do this sort of thing. And by continuously working on it, we become part of it. The whole of the creation is reborn in us. If we take the Rosicrucian initiations, in each one of those initiations, we recapitulate everything from the past, so that by the time we've gone through all the lesser initiations, the whole past of the universe lives in us. And all the principles that are in it are available to us, and we are then capable of being magical beings because we can consciously deal with those principles. Obviously, something analogous happens in the fifth revolution of the moon period. When we have the experience, the somatic experience of being independent and identifying ourselves in the subject-object relationship, the subject is realized. We're not talking about this like we do it now with ratiocination. We're talking about it that we are consciousness. We are conscious in a way. the cat isn't self-conscious of being a cat, but it knows itself and it knows what it has to do to get that mouse. And in that vague way, that is where we come to the recognition of an individual being. So, in the fifth revolution of the moon period, the self, the human spirit, is awakened. And in the succeeding revolutions, it is tied together with the life spirit and the divine spirit. So that we have at this point an entity, a divine being, an immaculately conceived being, because it hasn't touched into the concrete realms yet. It's only there in abstract. And so the consciousness is a different kind of consciousness. There have been spiritual philosophies in the past that have believed that that's all that is necessary, is that transcendent immaculate conception and nothing more. So you have a threefold body that's capable of acting independently and under motivation of its own, and we have a threefold spirit, a self, but that self is not anchored yet. It's not attached. It's not brought to earth. And of course, at the end of the moon period, there has to be another rest. We have to take all of that experience, and that's quite an experience to know that, I've talked to people that never knew that they were adopted until a certain age, and it took them quite a while to assimilate and to work through that experience. Hey, these are not my biological parents. And the same thing is true. It takes quite a while to understand, hey, I'm a divine being. And that's a glorious thing to know that you're God. It's not an egoistic thing, even though it's sometimes called the spiritual ego with a capital E. Probably better use the word self, because the words have changed in the century since Max Heindel. But it's quite a remarkable thing to know that you are that. And then you live up to it. Of course, you don't live up to it in your desire nature, even though you would like to. All right. I'm so far away from my notes that this is a totally different lecture than I had intended to give in the first place. And I have all kinds of little ditties in here. One of the things that comes up is that this whole business is not uniform. And this brings up an enigma that I have no answer for. But some of the evolving beings evolve better under some conditions rather than others. It's almost as if there was something in that one little speck, that one little position that was differentiated, that it has a quality that is different from another, which is something I don't understand. Some continue to resist adapting to conditions and to resist taking in what is given by the divine hierarchies or having full experiences, so that there is a large string of vehicles of experience. It's like what we see in the world now. There are hundreds of millions of species in the world. Many of them are in the animal kingdom, many are in the plant kingdom. Each human is a kingdom of its own. But of all of these species, scientists think that, just this is again material science, I can't vouch for it, that of all the hundreds of millions of species that there are now, it's less than 5% of all of the species that have ever been. So many have been wiped out, which means that they weren't necessary anymore. That line of evolution isn't necessary. Let's do something else. Something else will fit into the purpose better. But at any rate, we look around us and we look in the animal kingdom, even when we look at human beings. Different people have different talents and they do well at some things and not as others. Some people are very primitive, exceedingly primitive, and are not capable of counting beyond 3. There literally are people like that in the world, and you can test them. They don't get beyond 3. That's what their conceptology is. So the evolutionary creation has to take in all of its children. And it has to accommodate for all of these different deviations. It is said, it is stated quite clearly that in the future it will not be able to accommodate for everything, and some will be left behind. And that's a different kind of straddling between creations than the straddling between creations that the angels have done. But at any rate, there's a great sleep again. And now we come to the earth period. In the globes in the earth period, the deepest is in the spiritual direction is the world of concrete thought. And the chemical subdivision of the physical world is as deep as it goes into matter, as far as the evolutionary creation is that concerns us. There may be other creations, and they may be participated in by the same spirit that is the spirit behind our solar manifestation, but because we haven't been in them, we can't know them because we don't have the experience to know them. And it would probably take quite a long experience to know those other creations. But at any rate, the cosmos now comes to be physical as we know the cosmos. All of those worlds, concrete thought, desire world, etheric subdivision, and chemical subdivision, all of them are concrete. And this is as deep as the evolutionary creation goes, where everything is concrete. And that's why this is such a dangerous time. Because if we come to our waking self-consciousness in this period, and everything in this whole creation, including the life cycle, is all concrete, we begin to think that the cosmos itself is concrete. And we do a very great service if we can bring people to realize even just something like something abstract, to say nothing of something existing in the spirit of things. Because if we do that, we're making it much easier for the evolution to proceed apace without people being in this concrete materialism that we are in now. This is so funny. So funny, I'm looking at these notes. And there might just as well be a roll of toilet paper that I string out. We're already 25 minutes overstayed, so I'm going to have to be very fast, and I'm going to have to just zip through a few things. In the rest, in the cosmic night between the moon period and our current earth period, everything went to sleep again, and everybody learned from everybody else. It's sort of like when you're a young kid. I grew up on the farm, and I slept in the same bed as my brother, which had its positive points and it had its negative points. We didn't get along too well, but the positive point was that it was easier to get warm if you had two in there, because you could share the warmth from each other. And something like that is what it's like in the great solar cosmos. We share wisdom, we share experience with each other, and soul material is the common property of the universal spirit of which we all partake. But at this time, the greatest idea dawned on us. All along, we have been led at the material pole of our becoming being, that the bodies that we are producing are becoming finer and finer and more capable. And the objective of each of the three periods gave us a new capability, and that capability brought us closer to the Spirit. At the same time, the experience that brought us to those objectives awakened three powers of the Spirit, so that those three powers of the Spirit became one thing. A self. Just like three dots describe objective space because by connecting them with three straight lines, you have a triangle with an inside and an outside. And no matter how many dimensions of space that you have, the simplest objectification or the simplest object that you can produce is a triangle. There is an inside and there is an outside. And there is a self. And that self, that threefold self, that spiritual ego, is when all three of those capacities to be, the will to be, the imagination to take will, and from that to conceive a being. That was what was accomplished in the first three periods. But that reaches down toward its source. And its source is they were awakened because of the experience that they had in the three vehicles. So the grand idea that comes is if this self-knowing can be within, and it can be self-conscious of its own being within its own vehicles of experience, this is the ultimate. Because as the spirit draws into its vehicles, it can use those vehicles self-consciously. And the whole process is very much sped up because we understand why this is here, why this is there, and we can do things according to the way they're supposed to be. And that's wonderfully efficient. And at the same time, the spirit itself realizes its own creative ability. And so, as we become self-conscious, a whole new process enters in. The spirit coming into matter, that is the materialization of spirit through the creative dream, is one process. It's called involution. The spiritualization of matter, where stuff gets awakened and becomes spiritualized, the unknown becomes known, that's the second process. But when the two are united, the third process is an epigenesis. And in that epigenesis, we actually share with the divine the ability to create, even if it is the ability to consciously think. And that's where it begins. It begins in thinking. We become awake spiritual beings when we draw the self, the spiritual part of our being, into the mind, and we are the thinker. And in that thinking, we become autonomous, free, creative beings. And that is what is taking place right now. It happened in the fourth revolution on the fourth globe of the Earth period, in the epoch that is called the Atlantean epoch. It is a time when it was the first time in the whole evolutionary creation that spirit and matter actually touched together, which in some mythologies is called the divine kiss. Like the personality has the kiss from divine spirit of truth. Since then, it is our work through the process of thinking. The spirit, through the mind, controls the desire body. And that's the big one right now, because we have a pseudo-self that was reflectively projected by the hierarchies into the desire body to protect us when the hierarchies had to take hands off from direct ruling us because we took the creative function into our own hands. They had to recognize you're divine creators now. But so that we weren't eaten up, so to speak, in evolution, we were given this second self. And so a big work is controlling the desires by bringing the spirit to bear on the mind, and the mind is capable of controlling the desires and taming the desire nature. But as the spirit draws more and more into the physical consciousness, the epigenesis becomes stronger and stronger, and all of the second half of the evolution is creative. So, for example, right now we can only think in terms of form. That's, we're our mind is in its mineral stage of existence. So we can only think in terms of form. And so we make all kinds of ingenious things by manipulating form. When we can penetrate deeper into that center of being, into the heart of the creative mind, we can penetrate to the next level of the concrete mind, and we can think in terms of life. This means that in the next great period, in the Jupiter period, we will become demigods. And we will take the stuff of the minerals and we will bring it to life. Now there's something very important in this, because everything that we are is a product of the gods. Every organ in our body is emanated from some spiritual hierarchy. And if we want to be really free people, we have to evict the gods. Because then we are our own beings. And as the Spirit enters in, it does that. But it's not like throw the bum out. It is that we take the principles that have been given to us by the gods, and we share and we give them to the becoming beings that are in the mineral kingdom, and even assist in the other kingdoms, and we bring the mineral kingdom to life. In this very room, we do this every week. Every week, we have a healing service here. And in that healing service, we try to draw directly on life spirit, and we try to concentrate deep into our creative mind and produce a etheric substance, a life substance that is a miraculous healing power. It seems to be almost an impossible activity to do, but we keep working at it, and along the way, I think we help a lot of people. So what we're talking about is in the future, we will raise ourselves by raising others. We will raise the mineral kingdom first to be a plant, and then we will be able to give it emotion, and it'll be an animal. It'll be a much higher animal than our current animals, or what we were when we were animals, because a lot will have been learned by then. And finally, at the very end, we reach the deepest of all mysteries according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, and that is the mystery of the mind. Meaning to say, we will be able to think minds that can think for themselves, and that can be a vehicle for a spirit to work through. In other words, this is what those dreamers in artificial intelligence think they're doing already. They're not really doing it. But that is our destiny. It's all very glorious, and we can lay back and say that's what it's supposed to be. But the real matter is we have to do the work. And our work now, we sometimes have to do grunt work. That's true. But our work now is inner work. And if people are suffering, the best way we can help is through our inner work. By our spiritual exercises, we are becoming skilled thinkers. And when we are skilled thinkers and we intuit what the truth is, and we hold that truth concentrated in our consciousness, that radiates to the world around us. And other people pick it up. And sometimes it's unlikely where they pick it up. The teachings of Max Heindel about rebirth and consequence, you know who picked it up? Ann Landers. She did more than the Rosicrucian Fellowship to advance that part of the Rosicrucian philosophy than anybody I've seen. More people now think that way and live that way because Ann Landers said so. Now, as this is all going on, something happens that is, I don't want to say illusory, but it's something like an illusion. It's like an impression. If you have a spoked wheel and you start it spinning, when you get it spinning at a certain speed, it looks like the spokes move backwards. And the cosmos will be accelerating because more and more people will be evolving and will be doing more creative work. And as a consequence of that, because these globes or these realms are reflections of each other, there is a memory. So that when we come back to the Venus globe on the way out, there is a remembrance of the Sun globe. Like I've been here before, but the remembrance of the Sun globe is at a much higher level. And so that as we evolve, in this case meaning turn out of, as we evolve, we have more and more remembrance, and especially as the, the revolutions of the cosmos reach a certain speed, it's as if certain things go backwards in our consciousness. There's still forward progress. We still keep evolving forward, but there is this backward consciousness. And even though it appears to be an illusion, the effect is real. It's like, as astrologers, we know that the planets really don't go backwards. They don't go retrograde. They only appear to go retrograde. But the effect is real. If you've ever followed your life astrologically, you can see that there are periods when things go into abeyance or things turn around and such, and it's an obvious thing. The appearance or the apparentness of this is in our consciousness at the same time we're going forward. And so we're looking back. And the effect of looking back loosens up materiality. And realm by realm by realm dissolves. Before they're dissolved, it's just like what happens after death. All of the experiences of the physical world, when we die, we see those experiences in reverse order, and they get built into the desire body, in the region of impressionability. And the desire body takes the shape of the physical body that it was when it was alive. And then the physical body rots. The same thing happens to the cosmos. Realm by realm, world by world, they dissolve, but before they dissolve, their essential nature and the structure of them is built into the next higher realm. And all of the soul material that is being taken out of them in this grand cosmic retrospection gets built into the spirit. And the spirit, the threefold spirit, isn't just tied together. The threefold spirit collapses into itself, into a unity, until everything goes into what you might call a cosmic creative black hole, and all of the form is gone, and the universal spirit is in a great night between total manifestations. And so that's what we're part of, and this is why our spiritual exercises like retrospection and concentration and things are so important, because they're designed to be part of this evolutionary creation and work the same way that the evolutionary creation works, so we're in harmony with it all. If for no other reason, it makes the life less abrasive when we're working with it, rather than, as Paul said, kicking against the pricks. All right, that's as much as I have to say. I'm sorry it took too long. It's even more than an hour and a half. Let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to make you sit so long like this. Huh? I don't know if I put anybody to sleep or not. I was too busy to notice.
You did.